Welcome, everyone, to another episode of It Takes a Viking, the official podcast of the Salem State University Alumni Association. My name is Mike Mitchell, Assistant Director for Alumni Relations at Salem State. Today, we're very excited to have with us Dr. Kathleen Vander Kaaden, a planetary scientist from the Jacobs Engineering Group located at NASA in Houston. Kathleen, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, you know, I think of all the episodes that we'll ever do on this podcast, this is going to be one of the ones I'm looking forward to the most, because I think what you do is fascinating, and I cannot wait to share it with our listeners. So without further ado, the first question we always like to ask is what brought you to Salem State? How did you end up there?
Yeah, absolutely. Once I was going through high school, it became very obvious that I was definitely going to college. My, dad very much made sure I knew that was where I was headed. So I had applied to a few schools, state schools around Massachusetts. I had the Abigail Adams Scholarship for my MCAS scores. So I applied to a couple state schools, but I was hoping to pursue elementary education. That was my original plan for going through college. And so once I got into the various schools and started looking at the programs, Salem was really just ideal. One, because my parents said it was too far away to commute, so I could actually move and live on campus, which was exciting. And also the teaching program and education program that Salem offered was, second to none up there. And it was an added benefit that a few of my high school friends also got into Salem State. So the three of us decided that if we were going to move out of our really small town, we were going to do it together. So Salem was the best option for all of us.
And so you end up coming to Salem State and originally intending to pursue elementary education. Now we know that as a planetary scientist, that probably wasn't in line with what you were expecting to do when you first got there. So what was it that made you want to make the switch into studying the geological sciences and led you to the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I was in the honors program, and so we had a series of courses we had to complete to be in line with the honors program requirements, and one of them was Geology 101 course, and then the companion class, the historical geology class. And so I was just, completing my requirements to pursue my elementary ed major. And after I started taking the geology course, it's like, wow, this is really neat. And all the other students in there were geology majors and really excited about it. And then I took historical and I was like, wow, this is like really neat. And then Jeanette Sablock, who was my professor for those courses, and her husband, Pete, who was the chair of the department, were like, hey, we're sending these kids to field camp next year. Like, you want to come? And I was like, field camp? Like, sure. And after going to field camp and, spending 3 weeks just exploring Montana and doing field work, I pretty much made the decision for me that I, as much as I wanted to teach and be a teacher, that the science was really just super interesting. And I really wanted to see where that would take me in my career.
Great. And so you graduate Salem in 2010. And now completing your undergrad there. I know there were a couple other steps from the time you left Salem to where you are now. Can you explain to our listeners kind of those next few steps after you received your undergraduate degree?
Yeah, so I got my undergrad and I really wasn't sure what was next. I didn't really know grad school was a thing that you could do. More importantly, I didn't realize that in the sciences and in various STEM fields, you can actually get someone else to pay you to go to grad school. So that was super exciting. And Pete and Jeanette really pushed me to apply to different programs. And I, really love field camp. So I wanted to do structural geology and be outside and be in the field. But I really love planetary science. And, I only had one course in planetary science in undergrad, and it really just piqued my interest. So I kind of split my applications. I applied 50% of my schools for planetary science and then 50% for structural geology. And I ended up getting in at the University of New Mexico, which I actually applied for structural geology. And their director of their Institute of Meteoritics called and said, hey, I have these moon samples that you can work on if you're interested. So then I just decided it was fate and that planetary science was my destiny. So I ended up moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and completing my master's degree and my PhD there. with 2 different advisors, multiple different projects, looking at the moon and some lunar work, and then switching over to the planet Mercury, which is where my heart lies now in planetary science. And luckily, during my PhD, my advisor actually got a position at Johnson Space Center as the head curator of astromaterials. So he's in charge of every bit of outer space that we have in Houston. And so he brought me with him to finish my dissertation as an intern, and I was able to meet a lot of other planetary scientists and make some collaborations. And then I stayed on for a postdoc, and the timing was just right that a position opened up in my current lab, and the rest is history, I guess.
And so as you mentioned, your current position in the lab, whatever you're able to share, can you talk us through what independent of COVID times, what a normal day in the lab would look like for you and some of the things you might be doing?
So I work in the experimental petrology lab. So our lab slogan is "We build planets." So we basically take spacecraft data, and that's on the outside, the surface of planets, and we try to recreate the interior of planets in the lab. So we have to design start to finish the compositions we're going to use, what part of the planet we want to look at, if we want to look at the surface, if we want to look at the mantle aspect, the core aspect, multiple parts of the planet. And then we have to design our experiments from, what pressures we're looking at, what temperature we're interested in, what compositions we're looking to investigate, and build our experiments, which I tell people, if you can do a puzzle, you can run an experiment, because if it doesn't fit together right, it can't go into the instrument. So, we start with a little baby capsule. We say we build planets, but we build about 4-millimeter size planets. And we start with a little capsule, and we basically build it out into a larger structure that can go into one of our experimental apparatuses. And we pressurize them, so we squeeze them to whatever depth basically inside of a planetary body we're trying to get to. And then once we have squeezed them as hard as we need to, we ramp up the temperatures to get to the temperature of that same layer in the planetary body. And then we hold it there for as long as we need to let everything kind of settle and make whatever melts or whatever crystals or whatever we're going to make at that point. And then we do what we call quenching. So we just cut the temperature, and it basically freezes everything into place. So when we take the experiment out and we look at it in some of our analytical facilities, what we're looking at is what was in that experiment at those really high pressures and high temperatures. So we can use that information to learn about the interior of planets that we can't actually physically access, but we can run these experiments to learn how it's changed over time, the composition of the different layers, the difference between the inside of Mercury versus inside of Earth versus inside of Mars, and what that really means for the overall changes in our solar system over time.
Well, so again, as I mentioned, I think what you do is truly fascinating, and I know there's a cliche phrase that you could say about how amazing the work you're doing and being out of this world and everything like that. But I think one of the things we always get kind of a chuckle out of is when we have somebody like you you can tell the passion lies in their work and they love what they're doing. We always wonder, what if you weren't doing this? What do you think you would be doing? What would life look like for you if you weren't a planetary scientist?
It's a tough question. I feel like I have gotten so deep into it. It seems like this is it. But I can see kind of 2 different career paths I would have taken. I'm still very passionate about teaching. I think for sure I would have gone into education. I do a lot of education and public outreach as it is, and try to go into elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and talk to students about our work and get them excited in STEM, and help them, understand how awesome our work is, and then potentially pursue it as they go to college here. So definitely education. If not, I think probably some sort of nonprofit advocacy, make the world a better place kind of position. I work with the Big Brothers Big Sisters program down here in Houston, which is a phenomenal organization, and just seeing the pure joy in the kids' faces when we can expose them to new things and make their day a little bit better, and help them forget about some of the hardships that they're going through at home and just see like pure, really pure joy. That's definitely where my heart lies. So probably one or two of those things.
Okay, great. And as we think about, we talk about what you would be doing if you weren't a planetary scientist, thinking back to your time as a student and you were considering your next move after graduation, if you were able to be in front of a group of graduating seniors or perhaps recent young alumni who are interested in what you're doing or learning more about your work, where would be a good place for them to start?
Definitely with their current professors. In the geology department at Salem State, there aren't any, or there were not any planetary scientists strictly. You have people that study different types of rocks, different aspects of Earth mainly, but they've been through this whole process and they know what it takes, and they know the ins and the outs. And I remember the first thing when Pete and Jeanette were like, grad school, that's the next step. I went home and I was telling my dad, who's an auto body repair technician, I was like, Dad, I'm going to grad school. This is the path. This is what you do in this field, I found out. His initial reaction was like, sweetie, like, that's really awesome. I'm so happy for you, but like, you just can't afford that. Like, that's not a realistic goal. We don't have the money. This is not anything we can pay for. And so I kind of went back to Pete and Jeanette, like, thank you so much for this opportunity, but I just can't afford it. I talked to my dad. It's not financially responsible. And they're like, afford it? Like, you don't have to afford anything. Like, these people are going to pay you, and they're going to give you health insurance, and they're going to pay for all of your research, and you're going to get a monthly stipend. And like, what are you talking about? And so just finding those mentors and finding those advocates that are going to, help you get to where you want to be, but more importantly, open up new avenues that you didn't even know existed, so that you can, pursue them and get to places even better than you ever imagined.
That's great. And it's, as we look in the world today, STEM is playing such an important field in so many different areas: sciences, medicine, research, overall healthcare. I mean, there's going to be no shortage of opportunities in STEM, I think, for the foreseeable future. So having an understanding of where a good place to start will be, I think, will be helpful for a lot of the students that, that'll be leaving the school over the coming years.
Absolutely.
But as we look to the current and kind of the future, what does life in the lab look like for you now, or are you even in the lab with everything that's going on with COVID?
So right now we're not in the lab. We have very minimal scientists. We actually have slim to no scientists on site right now at Johnson Space Center. We mainly have engineers and then our mission control. So one thing that has not stopped during COVID is we have always had astronauts on the International Space Station. So if anyone listening is less than 20 years old, every day you've been alive, there's been someone living in space. And at Johnson Space Center, we're responsible for talking to them and, helping them get through their daily activities and keeping them safe. So we have mission critical work only on site right now, which is, mainly astronaut functions and some spacecraft that are out in outer space, going to collect samples from asteroids, for example, with OSIRIS-REx. So that work has continued, and there's been a ton of precautions that have been put into place: social distancing, masks. If you watch a lot of the NASA broadcasts, you'll see plexiglasses in between announcers, or broadcasters and announcers, like the football. If you watch NFL football, you'll also sometimes see that plexiglass. And so that work has continued. And next week, we're going to start to slowly add a few people, maybe 10% of our people, and then 10% more, and see if the procedures that we've put into place are working. We don't want to, we're doing good now. We don't have numbers rising on site, but we don't want to just send everyone back in and hope the precautions hold. So, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to slowly transition our scientists back on site. But it's going to be very different. We're not going to be having, once a month, our entire division has a meeting, and it usually is just all of us cramming into a conference room, around a table, sitting on floors, sitting on chairs. That's, not going to happen anymore. We're still encouraging telework when possible. So if you're processing your data, if you're writing your paper, if you're writing a grant, still do that from home and your home office, whatever that may look like. Mine is my kitchen table. I've not had dinner at a kitchen table since March. That's okay. We got these nice little TV dinner trays that we can transport around the apartment wherever we want to sit for dinner. But limiting the number of personnel in the labs is going to be huge. A lot of teamwork, communication, making sure that only the people that need to be there are there. But on the same token, that there's enough people there so that whatever we're doing is being done in a safe manner.
Great. It's interesting too, because, for those of us that are in just purely more of an administrative kind of work, I mean, for even us who do live events, everything was just kind of shuttered and you were just starting to work at home. And I think it's something that most people wouldn't think about, that in a field like yours, for most cases, the work doesn't stop. And so how do you adapt to keep operations safe, but still be able to work effectively? And it's an unenviable task. I can say that for sure.
It's a lot of teamwork, a lot of different perspectives being put together, because we do have some folks that are 100% lab work. So now we go to COVID and we send everyone home, and it's like, well, I only work in the lab. Like, I don't want to write papers. I don't, want to write proposals. I run your instruments. And so, just taking a step back, like, what else can we do? Like, developing, and most of them have been, going to webinars, learning more about the tools that we have, and developing new techniques. So our hope is when we go back on site and when we do get back into the groove of things, we can push the boundaries a little bit further than we've currently been pushing them with all of this new knowledge that they've gained.
It's wonderful. I think, they keep calling it the new normal, whatever it looks like, but I think every organization should also be using this as an opportunity to find new ways to do things. And, it sounds like you've all done that for sure, as many others have. But again, understanding that your work is probably a little bit different than what the average bear is doing. It's really incredible to hear about how it's all changed and how you're still able to do it. So I think before we let you go, the one question I always like to end with is, and in a special case of yours, where this past summer you're named the Rising Star by the Alumni Association, and I was so thrilled to hear that. I always like to ask, as a graduate of Salem State, what does that mean to you to be a graduate of our university?
Yeah, it means a lot. I mean, I definitely think about it all the time. If, say I got into Bridgewater State, and say I had gone to Bridgewater instead, where would I be? Would I have followed a similar career path? Would I be teaching in the elementary school that I went through myself, that my nephew's going to go through? That was my current plan, to stay in Assonet, Massachusetts for my entire life. What would that look like? So one of the things that I really didn't appreciate until I went to Salem State was really the diversity that we have around us. And, being from a very small town in Southern Mass, Salem was a huge culture shock to me. And it was really great to be in a community where differences were embraced, and it really helped me also embrace my own differences. And, I always knew I was a little different than the people that I went to high school with, but it wasn't until I went to Salem and was in this culture that everyone was so accepting and so kind, and it was such a diverse place, that I, realized, like, oh, those differences are like, oh, I actually am gay, and people here are okay with that. Whereas, if you were gay where I went to high school, people were not okay with that. So just being able to appreciate diversity and embrace it, and more importantly, celebrate it. Being a graduate of Salem State means everything to me. It set me on my career path. It helped me get to where I am. Being recognized with the Rising Star Award this past summer was such an honor. So appreciative of that. And it was also really great because it put me back into touch with a lot of the people that I had gone to undergrad with that, some I haven't spoken to in a decade now, which I can't believe I can say I graduated from Salem a decade ago. But yeah, it was an incredible opportunity, and it definitely shaped a huge aspect of my life in a way that I never really thought undergraduate school would do.
Well, I think I can speak for everybody that knows your story, that may be listening to this. I would venture to guess that the future for you is limitless based on what you're doing, and understanding that our universe is forever changing, and there's always going to be a need for an understanding of it. And so I wish you the continued best. I know you'll stay in touch with us. Thank you for joining us. It's been absolutely fascinating to learn more about what you do and how you do it. Again, thank you just so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of It Takes a Viking, the official podcast of the Salem State University Alumni Association. My name is Mike Mitchell, Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Salem State. Until next time, thanks for joining us.